If you're looking for Week 11 running back ranks and tiers, you are in the right place. We'll kick it off with the S tier. Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson. Tom, Achane is our running back one this week. The Dolphins were supposed to be a tire fire, but he is continuously producing. Are we expecting it to keep rolling this week?
Yeah, I don't see any reason for it not to. They play the Commanders at home in Miami. Obviously, they just came off a big win against the Bills at home in Miami. And this team is actually playing pretty good for Mike McDaniel, aside from the Ravens game, where they didn't really look all that competitive for a lot of it. They are playing hard. I mean, there's people around Miami who are talking about like them trying to run the table to get into the playoffs, and that feels a little bit too much. But Devon Achane, 225 total yards. We talked in the QB video about how Bryce Young hasn't even hit 150 passing yards in the last few weeks. So when you've got one player who can go out and have 28 total touches, 225 total yards, and 2 touchdowns, there are quarterbacks in this league who aren't capable of putting up those numbers. Now, yes, he's not going to have a week like that every single week, but the Commanders' defense isn't one which we need to worry about. They've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to the running back position. In rush EPA defensively, they've allowed they ranked 24th. And I just think that the Commanders' season is slowly spiraling away, and Devon Achane and the Dolphins should be very much up for this one.
Yeah, and then also in this tier, we've got Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, consistent, high performance, elite receiving usage. But interestingly now, it's 2 weeks in a row where Brian Robinson has seen a decent rush share. Last week, Brian Robinson was at 40%. McCaffrey was at 60% running back rush share. Are you concerned that this is now, 1 week is random, 2 weeks is a trend?
Not really, because let's be fair, Christian McCaffrey hasn't been good in the ground game. Like, the carries he gets there are completely empty value. Like, that's not where any of his value in fantasy football is coming from. And you look across like the last few weeks, and he's had 2 games over 34 PPR points. The problem is that the games where he doesn't get the receiving work or doesn't score a touchdown, and have typically been receiving touchdowns, then he ends up like in much more normal situations and scoring games like 10 points, 17.6 points. I kind of hit this point the other day where I wonder, would CMC just be more useful just as a full-time slot receiver for the Niners right now and just put Brian Robinson back there, running back? Because Brian Robinson, even in the limited sample that we see, is outperforming Christian McCaffrey in yards per carry, those kind of stats, yards before contact. So, yeah, I mean, CMC, we're going to continue to rank him up here because of the receiving role and because of how good he is. But it's just very noteworthy that he doesn't seem to have the same juice in the ground game.
Yeah, so I can remember Daniel Jeremiah with him as a prospect coming out saying that, if he was a slot receiver, he'd be a first-round pick still. Yeah. So maybe that's it. Maybe we're going to see it come full circle.
The targets he's had 90 receiving targets, and you go through the list, and like there aren't that many players who've had more than that across the board. You look at the running backs, and there's a huge gulf between McCaffrey and the next nearest.
Yeah, and then in the A tier, we do have Jahmyr Gibbs and Josh Jacobs. Tom, I feel like I've been banging the drum saying the Detroit Lions backfield is no longer a 50-50 split. It's been 66-33 in Jahmyr Gibbs' favor for much of the year. We see a change in play caller. Dan Campbell comes in and immediately returns to 50-50. Jahmyr Gibbs played 50% of snaps. David Montgomery, 54%. They both ran between 45 and 48% of routes. They both had 48% backfield share. The concerning thing for me is that Jahmyr Gibbs was only on the field for 1 pass protection snap last week. They seem to have shifted all of that work to David Montgomery. Does that impact Jahmyr Gibbs for you just from a pure volume play and worries, I guess, that it could be a significant reduction overall?
Well, for all your incredibly valid and good points there, Gibbs still scored 38.2 PPR points. So it's definitely, and it's difficult to get away from that at times. And then, then if a player stinks it up and then all those kind of trends are there, then that becomes a talking point. So sometimes we can get ahead of those talking points by talking about him even on the back of success. So it is slightly concerning that he's not in for the pass protection stuff, definitely. But I'm kind of okay with still ranking him this high as RB4. But I think because the way to get at the Eagles this year is through the ground game. They've allowed the 10th most fantasy points to the running back position. They've allowed 20 plus running back fantasy points in 7 of 9 games, and that's the backfields as a whole. So how that gets divvied up is obviously a conversation. But like this Lions offense, like Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, you're starting both of them pretty much each and every single week. And even though I wouldn't necessarily push Gibbs higher, I still feel like the ceiling games are always going to be worth chasing. But if you roster him, you feel fairly comfortable with it.
Yeah, and then also in this tier, obviously, we've got Josh Jacobs. Is it me or is Josh Jacobs having one of the quietest great seasons ever? Like, he's running back 6 on the season, averaging 19.6 points per game. Hasn't had a single week where he's produced below 12.4 fantasy points. We've got a 32-pointer in there, a 31.7-pointer, but just consistent RB1 production every single week. And nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, it's solid, not spectacular stuff, and it's kind of been this way ever since he joined the Packers. He now has 28 touchdowns in 27 games with the Packers. This week, going up against the Giants is just, I mean, absolute cupcake stuff. Nobody has a higher yards per carry allowed than the Giants at 5.53, and I would feel very confident that Josh Jacobs is going to go out there against literally the worst run defense in the league and put up a lot of points. They've allowed the second most fantasy points, even to the point where I think in deeper leagues, you can look at Emmanuel Wilson possibly getting there in garbage time as well.
Trust me, Tom, there are some deep Dynasty leagues where I'm starting Emmanuel Wilson this week. Before we go into our B tier, though, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Help us out to help you out, and make sure our content is finding its way to you. In the B tier, we do have Ashton Jeanty, Rico Dowdle, Javonte Williams, James Cook, and Saquon Barkley. Tom, Ashton Jeanty has, should we say, under-delivered on the hype, but this is a dream matchup. Will he come good this week and help the teams that spent all of that draft capital on him back in September?
Yeah, so to your point, playing against the Cowboys, who've allowed third most fantasy points for the running back position, they ranked 29th in rush EPA allowed, and they've just stunk throughout the season against the run, despite Jerry Jones saying part of the Micah Parsons trade was to try and deal with the run defense. It just hasn't been that way at all. They've allowed the highest explosive run rate at 9%. They've just been woeful. So if Jeanty can't do it here, then you would definitely be rather concerned. But I think he's kind of going to be all right. Like when you scroll down through the list of weeks that he's had, like over the past, well, since week 4, 34 points, 15.9, 16, 4.4, 19.9, and 15.3. So out of those 6, like you've had 5 above 15 points. Now, maybe that's not the 25, 20 points that you'd really like from a round 1 talent, but it's pretty good. It's usable, and we can live with that. I mean, it's better than some players ahead of it, some players who were drafted in similar range to him. So I think Jeanty is going to be fine here. I think that the offense as a whole has just been massively disappointing compared to what we hoped for. But I'd still feel pretty excited for this matchup.
Yeah, and the shift with Jeanty that you mentioned there has come largely because he's been involved in the receiving game. You know, to start the year, we were seeing Dylan Lowby getting a lot of pass snaps and stuff. It was achieving nothing. Last week, Ashton Jeanty saw 75% route participation rate, 19.2% targets per route run. Like that receiving work is what has buoyed him from a fantasy perspective, and hopefully that now does continue down the stretch.
Yeah. It's also like the Raiders, we thought their offensive line could be serviceable. Like last year, it looked pretty good. There was enough pieces of it coming back that it was like, okay, maybe not a top 10 unit or anything, but definitely not as atrocious as they are. Like I would easily have them as one of the bottom 3 offensive lines in the league.
Absolutely. And then we move into Rico Dowdle, who, Tom, if Rico Dowdle if you just took the games where he started, who averages more fantasy points, Jonathan Taylor or Rico Dowdle?
Well, I'm going to have to assume Rico Dowdle.
You would be correct. Jonathan Taylor's averaging 27.4 fantasy points per game. Rico Dowdle's in games where he has been the starter, he's averaging 27.425 fantasy points per game. Are we just missing something here? Should Rico Dowdle be so much higher, just considering his production whenever he has been the starter?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like, he is the brightest spot on that offense in Carolina right now. Now, the matchup on paper, when you look at the season-long stats going up against the Falcons, isn't amazing because the Falcons ranked reasonably well on run defense, but like over the last few games, they've just been unable to stop anything. You scroll back over the last few into combined backfields. They allowed 51.8 last week, 24 the week before, 37.5 the week before that, and 42.7 the week before that. They just are hemorrhaging points every week. They're giving up multiple touchdowns to running backs. And yeah, I feel like Dowdle has the kind of RB1 overall potential for this week, but it's a little bit difficult. Maybe it's just still that bias of just holding it against him, but to push him ahead of those guys above, I couldn't push him further than, I guess, even Gibbs, even if I was trying to be as optimistic as possible.
Yeah, my tongue was firmly lodged in its cheek there when I was saying that we should be bumping him higher. I feel comfortable where he's ranked. I do think that he has a lot more bust potential than the guys that we've got in the two tiers above him. The final player we do have in this B tier, though, oh, how the mighty have fallen. The running back 1 overall. Some people spent the first overall draft pick on him back in August. Saquon Barkley. I really believe that in week 8, this Eagles running game seemed to get their act together. I thought that Landon Dickerson coming back and a little bit more investment in some 6th offensive lineman on the field was going to help Saquon get back to 2024 form. But yes, it was a slightly tough matchup last week, but he still didn't really get home, only 13.1 fantasy points. Do you have any hope that it was a 1-week blip and the trend is heading towards Saquon Barkley superstar again?
Well, I mean, last week it was very much the receiving work, wasn't it? It was that one long broken play that really turned everything around. Now, the week you mentioned in week 8, where he averaged 10 yards per carry, it's so hard not to look at that as an outlier because against the Packers, who have a pretty good run defense, he had 2.7 yards per carry. In week 7, 2.4 yards per carry. And so far this season, he's had 5 different games where he's been below 3.3 yards per carry. When you look at rushing touchdowns, he's had 5 different games where he hasn't managed to find the end zone. It's just not been there at all. The explosive runs aren't there. And this Eagles offense, it's just like muddling through and doing what it needs to get through. And the way to beat the Lions isn't with the ground game. Like, they've been very good there. They rank 11th best in rush EPA allowed. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points from running back position. So, no, I don't feel massively hopeful about Saquon this week.
And then in the C tier, we have got Jaylen Warren, Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and RJ Harvey. I ranked Jaylen Warren very, very high initially. And then I was like, I can't be this high on Jaylen Warren. He basically missed out on the majority of the receiving work. I settled him in at my running back 11. So did you, Tom. Were you tempted to squeeze him up a little bit higher into the B tier?
It maybe be a little bit easier if it wasn't for Mike Tomlin talking about how the reason why they took him off the field on 3rd downs last week, which in his response was just, you can't play every down. And also, there was at least one drive where it looked like they would try to get Caleb Johnson involved a little bit more. Now, going up against the Bengals, if game script went their way, would they try and get Caleb Johnson involved a little bit more? If game script doesn't go their way and they end up being pass heavy, then does Kenneth Gainwell end up getting more of that? But ultimately, you look at Jaylen Warren, and he's the 4th best running back in missed tackles forced per attempt. He ranks top 10 in yards after contact per attempt, has an excellent success rate. And this Bengals defense, nobody has allowed more fantasy points to the running back position. They rank 31st in EPA allowed. So, yeah, fringe running back 1. but I just don't think we ever get quite the volume from Jaylen Warren to really deliver the true elite week.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and that's kind of where I settled him in, as I said, at my running back 11. As much as the matchup is amazing, I just don't think volume-based you can squeeze him any higher. We've also got in this tier Kyron Williams. Tom, now, it's been a little bit of a trend that's been growing week in, week out this year. Last week, Kyron Williams saw a 51% running back rush share, whilst Blake Corum saw 48%. Yes, okay, Kyron Williams still got home with 22.4 fantasy points, but are you concerned that this is a real thing and we're now going to see more of a split backfield?
Yeah, I think it very much is a real thing, and I think this is kind of what Sean McVay's wanted for a little while now. Like over the last 3 games, you look at how this is split out, and it really is just like alternating drives at times. You really have to pay attention. Like if you're just watching Red Zone and it goes back and forth, you really have to glance twice to make sure the number on the shirt actually matches who you think it'll be. And over those last 3 games, Williams had 12 carries, 25, 14, Blake Corum 12, 13, 13. Now, kind of importantly, Kyron has had 10 of 14 carries inside the 10 over the last 4 weeks, according to Fantasy Points. But I don't think anything about this matchup with the Seahawks screams a good week for either of them, because the Seahawks have the number 1 defense in rush EPA, the number 1 defense in DVOA, like all these efficiency metrics kind of head towards that. And the Seahawks, they've allowed only 1 running back rush touchdown in the last 4 games. They've only allowed 3 all season. Everything the Seahawks do is fantastic on defense, and I think this is a low ceiling game for Kyron.
Yeah, I mean, he played 58% of snaps last week. That's the lowest percentage of snaps he's played since the Rams drafted Blake Corum. So it's not a positive trend, should we say? And with a tough matchup, I think if you can get away from Kyron Williams, probably should be looking to do so. We are recording this before Thursday Night Football, Tom. Trevion Henderson is expected to play in that game. I feel like we need to touch on him, just given the blow-up week that was last week. Are you expecting more of the same, or do you think it could come back down to earth this week?
It's a little tough to tell. I mean, Ramondre was out for the walkthrough yesterday, but working on his own. So do we see him at all on a short week against the Jets? Like, look, I mean, the Jets 11.5 point underdogs on the road. Like, you would like to think that the Patriots have enough that they don't need to rush Ramondre back. You go back and look at last week, Terrell Jennings handled the backfield's first 4 carries of the day before he went out with an injury. Then Dearness Johnson did get a goal line carry later on, but for the most, it was Trevion Henderson, 14 carries, 1 target, 150 total yards, and 2 touchdowns, and looked everything that we thought he could be, explosive. So in a positive game script, can he hang on to that and just keep rushing the ball well? I think that there's enough that I'm going to be playing him in my home league with confidence at one of my running back spots. And the Jets, they're a team just limping to the end, aren't they?
Absolutely. It cannot get here soon enough, Tom. RJ Harvey is the final player in this tier. At recording, we are not expecting J.K. Dobbins to play. I feel like if that news becomes official, some people may get overhyped and talk of RJ Harvey as an RB1. I still expect Tyler Badie to get significant work if that was the case. Tom, do you think RJ Harvey RB2 sounds about right, given the expected volume?
Yeah, I think it's not even just Bidet, it's Jaleel McLaughlin as well. And if those 2 guys steal some of the passing work, which is something which both of them are kind of fine at, then that eats into the ceiling. Now, I'm not trying to crap on Harvey. I think that Harvey is set for a nice stretch here. If J.K. Dobbins ends up on injured reserve, then it will be meaningful for Harvey, and I doubt that he'll lose touches when Dobbins comes back. But going up against the Chiefs, who've allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back position, who have been reasonable at times against the run, I don't think that this is a ceiling kind of game. It would be easier to be excited about other opponents. I mean, last week, they played just 4 fewer snaps and ran just 2 fewer routes than RJ Harvey, according to late round QB, just JJ Zacharyson. So that's kind of been how the story has been plenty of games, and now just to take J.K. Dobbins out, I don't think it all gets turned over to Harvey.
As we move into our RB3 territory, if you are having some start-sit challenging decisions, I know I certainly am this week, given the bye weeks, make sure you get your comments in the questions below. Tom and I will offer our thoughts, our advice, and ensure you set the right lineup come Sunday. In the D tier, we do have Breece Hall, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, Woody Marks, and Rashad White. Tom, Aaron Jones, I thought he looked amazing on Sunday. I thought he looked really, really impressive. Obviously picked up yet another injury. Do you think that he could be slightly undervalued this week?
Yeah, I do. The Bears have been reasonable against the running back position at times, but on the season, you kind of zoom out and you go, okay, well, they're middle of the pack in rush EPA defense, but they've allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. And part of that is because they just keep getting into shootouts. So if the Vikings can go toe-to-toe with them, this game is a 49-point over-under, then I'm very much expecting Aaron Jones to have value. He had 71% of the snaps. He had the touchdown, I think it was at the goal line against the Ravens. And Jordan Mason, much as I was excited for him earlier in the season when it looked like we were getting that kind of zero RB handcuff who was going to have a good spell, he's stunk it up for a little while now. So Aaron Jones, if he can stay healthy, has all the opportunity he needs.
Yeah, a big if there. Another player that did return last week was DeAndre Swift. A little bit of trepidation around what the split would be between Swift and Monangai. It turned out 2/3 Swift, 1/3 Monangai. DeAndre Swift, solid RB2 this week?
Yeah, I think so. And you can kind of look at the Vikings and say, how do you play this team? Are they a team who are going to give us a lot to the running back position? And then not necessarily they've allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to the position. But the way Ben Johnson's designing things is creative enough that you kind of want to play the best players in those matchups. Again, this game's got a 49-point over-under, so I think that I'm not too concerned about it. Kyle Monangai definitely looks like a great player, but DeAndre Swift this year, and look, we're certified DeAndre Swift haters typically on this channel, but DeAndre Swift has played well enough this year that he deserves still to be the RB1 in this backfield for now.
Absolutely. And then we have also got Woody Marks in this tier, Tom. I know I've probably got a little bit overexcited, shall we say, at times this year, and Woody Marks. But last week, 80% of snaps, 55% route participation, 73% running back rush share. This is Woody Marks' backfield now, rest of the season.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said last week that I wanted to see a little more from Woody Marks. Like I was having trouble ranking them because he wasn't really separating from Nick Chubb. And then you get him come out and hit all those marks that you just said. And he's also just creating explosive runs at a really good rate. Like he ranks 15th amongst running backs when it comes to that metric. He's been efficient in the receiving game and he's been solid everywhere you would kind of want him to be. And so now if he's actually getting the touch share and the opportunities in a more dominant way, then it's so much easier to trust him. And going up against the Titans who look lost as 7-point favorites on the road, and the Titans allow the 4th most fantasy points for running back position. Yeah, I'm very much with you on Woody Marks this week.
In the E tier, we do have Kamani Vidal, Jacory Croskey-Merritt, David Montgomery, Tyron Tracy, Zach Charbonnet, Tajay Spears, Kenneth Walker, Amari DiMercado, Kareem Hunt, Kyle Monangai, and Tony Pollard. Tom, let's start with JCM. I don't like victory laps, but I feel like JCM not turning into the fantasy superstar that some people anointed him to be earlier in the season is a pat on the back for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky with these guys who, low draft capital investments. They have very much a thin sort of like runway to be relevant. And if you're not able to get it done, then you are going to start losing touches. Now, this week going up against the Dolphins, that was a matchup which we were absolutely hammering for a good while. But over the last 3 weeks, Miami ranks 3rd best in rushing EPA allowed, despite facing Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, of course, and James Cook and Josh Allen. They have just really switched it up on defense, despite the fact they traded away Jalen Phillips. And I think that it's not an easy matchup And again, you kind of point to the fact that Miami are at home. They do tend to play a little bit better at home as well. So I wouldn't. I mean, if you've rostered JCM, you probably are going to play him, and maybe he can get there. But there was nowhere that Chris Rodriguez got the goal line carry last week, and I think the points that JCM did put up last week largely came because Chris Rodriguez left the game and missed half of it.
Yeah, it just feels like when you've got three backs in a backfield, one seeing the goal line work, one seeing the early downs, and one seeing the receiving work. None of them are usable when it's a bad offense.
Yeah.
So it's just painful. Another offense that we saw three backs used quite heavily last week is Seattle. It feels like it's been a weekly debate of, is it Kenneth Walker? Is it Zach Charbonnet? Is the answer just neither of them and both are just flex plays?
Well, I think Charbonnet's playable. I mean, like, you look at what he's put up, and he scored double-digit points in 4 of his 5 games since week 4. In that time, Kenneth Walker's not scored double-digit points in any of them. Kenneth Walker's not had a rushing touchdown since week 4. Like, Kenneth Walker is by far the bigger concern for me. Now, yes, both players have a tough matchup against the Rams this week, who will have the second fewest fantasy points to the running back position. They rank top 3 in rushing EPA allowed. But the Seahawks are so committed to the run. Like, nobody runs even when trailing by 7 points as much as the Seahawks do this year, despite the fact that their ground game stinks. Like, they rank 26th in offensive rushing EPA. They've not been good, but I have more faith in Zach Charbonnet, and Kenneth Walker's somebody that, like, I'm just looking to, if I can find a believer and trade him away to them, then I'll happily do that right now.
And then the final player in this tier we've got is Kareem Hunt. Before the bye week, he saw a lot of work. He saw pretty much the backfield. We're expecting no Isaiah Pacheco this week. Do you think Kareem Hunt could be that sneaky sleeper that you may be able to start as a flex play and give you borderline RB1 production?
I think so, yeah, because, I mean, I've been a bit of a Rashad Smith skeptic. Now, maybe coming out of the bye, we get the post-bye rookie bump for him. But Kareem Hunt, for his part, is playing some of the best football that he's played in a long time since he was with the Chiefs the first time around. Like, you look at his success rate, which is at 57%. That is a career high. You look at his yards per attempt is sitting above 4 for the first time since 2021. Now, yes, the volume isn't incredible. Like, we would like to see a little bit more. But his longest rush this season as well is sitting at 33 yards, which is as good as it's been since 2018. The touchdowns are really holding him up, and I just think that the touchdowns are going to keep coming to him around the goal line. And for that reason, like, if you're playing 4 running backs in a starting lineup, then I'm fine with Kareem Hunt sneaking in there as your RB4.
I'm definitely starting him in Scott Fish Bowl. So, let's hope for a big volume week for him. In the F tier, the guys that, let's be honest, you probably want to be moving away from: Tyler Algier, Kenneth Gainwell, Jordan Mason, Devin Singletary, Nick Chubb, and Sean Tucker. Tom, Tyler Algier, a player you mentioned several times throughout the offseason, is having a really nice touchdown season and giving you borderline RB2 production quite a few weeks. Do you think that trend could continue again this week?
Yeah, I mean, say just a few times is definitely underselling it. I'm not sure I talked about anybody as much as Tyler Algier this offseason, and it's all kind of come to fruition for it. Like, yes, the touchdowns he scored were from the 1 yard line, so you could push back and say he was gifted them ahead of Bijan Robinson, but he also added 55 yards on his other 9 carries. Like, he's had 6 touchdowns this year. The only running backs with more rushing touchdowns than Tyler Algier's 6 are James Cook, Jahmyr Gibbs, Javonte Williams, Josh Jacobs, and Jonathan Taylor. Like, he's had 5 games with double-digit carries. This is the kind of player that you want to be picking up and being able to start on bye weeks when things are really bleak out there. And, friend of the channel, Ian Hart, put this quite well. Why have the Falcons given the ball to Tyler Algier so much? He's only averaging 5.9 yards per carry and scoring touchdowns.
It's as simple as that. One player who I think was probably the most added player in my waiver runs across all my leagues this week was Sean Tucker. Looks like Bucky Irving's not going to play again. Rashad White, not really getting it done on the ground. Sean Tucker saw 42% running back rush share. Surprisingly, saw a 20% targets per run on those pass snaps as well. Do you think maybe we're seeing him starting to eat into this backfield? Could maybe be the RB2 to Bucky Irving when he finally gets back on the field?
I don't know about that because Rachaad White is good at what he does, and like the team seem to like him enough. But I mean, my count would be I don't think either Rachaad White or Bucky Irving have been particularly great for fantasy. I mean, neither have gone over 12 points since week 6, and it's not been particularly great from either of them. Now, going up against the Bills, this should be a game where they can establish the run a little bit more. The Bills have played soft against the running back position at times. You know, we saw what Devin Achane did to them last week, 225 total yards. They've given up 4.3 yards per carry or higher in 3 of the last 4 games. They've allowed a running back rushing touchdown every week apart from week 2. So you can score on the Bills in the ground game. They've given up the 5th most fantasy points. They rank 30th in EPA allowed. Maybe that suits Sean Tucker slightly more than Rachaad White. But if game script leans into a high scoring affair, then I trust Rachaad White to be involved in the passing game more still, just because of the greater body of work we've seen.
And that is it. You know what to do. You made it this far. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the hype, and of course, get your comments in below. And make sure you're checking out these other videos that we've released this week.